Hi, Terry here, and welcome to Times Gone Tech. This video is part 3 in my Making Propellant for Antique Muzzle Loader series revisit. Did one about 2 years ago on different ways of making propellant for antique muzzle loaders. And this series, I'm following that up with how I'm currently doing it, which I'm actually running a few tests while I'm doing it. So anyway, today I'm going to be corning or grinding, glazing, and sorting. And let me get these gloves on. In fact, one of the reason I'm wearing these is because if you've never had charcoal underneath your fingernails, you have no idea how hard it is to get out. So anyway, I've ground up my discs. Get them out here and show you a few. Here's what they look like now. They are nice and hard. Very hard. And so now I'm going to break them up into chunks and put them in my little grist mill here and grind them up. And this is actually, it's a hand-operated mill designed really for grains like corn, making cornmeal, things like that. But it works on black powder pretty well also. The only thing is, it doesn't have an F grade setting, so I can't dial it to 3F and then run my discs through and get 3F black powder. But with a little trial and error, I can get mostly 1F or mostly 3F, just depending on what quality that I want, what grade. So I've been making 1F. I've got enough of that, I think. So I'm going to finish up this batch with mostly 3F. So I have mostly 3, a little bit of 2, and some 1F. So let's get started. First, I'll take this cloth and we're going to take about 3 of these discs. I'm going to put them in the cloth like so, and then put them on the floor and break them up with a rubber mallet like so. So what they look like, that. Then I've got my flexible plastic. I'm going to get that out of the way, and get that out of the way. Underneath my mill, we'll dump this on to the plastic. And dump it in, just like that. Reset it. Okay, I had to take my gloves off because I'm filming this with my cell phone, and with the gloves on, I can't punch the record and stop buttons and all that, so I decided what the hell, just take them off. So I'll just live with charcoal under my fingernails for a few days. Anyway, I'm going to grind this up into kind of a coarse grade, so I'm going to crank this down a little bit. Like so. Now, crank it down again, tighten it up a little, and you can see it's got a lot of really coarse and starting to get some finer stuff too in it. So now we'll run that through again. And there, we'll crank it down again and run it through one more time. Okay, now let me move my camera over. It looks like it's a lot of powder, just a lot of fine powder, but it's actually not. It's mostly 3F. I'll use this. Going to start out, I'll use this. I'm going to dump this into a 20 mesh screen. Now the 20 mesh will sort out everything smaller than a 1F. And you can see there's pretty much nothing left, which is what I wanted on this batch. I wanted mostly 3F because I got plenty of 1F. You can see there's pretty much nothing left. So we're just going to call that done. Now I'm going to take a 50F screen, and that'll sort out everything finer than a 3F. And you can see there's some, it's granulated. It's not all powdery. It's got some powder, but not a lot. And now I'm going to dump that into my ball mill drum. And this leftovers here, which has actually got a lot of 4F and others in it, I'm going to keep that because I'm going to run that back through the ball mill, powder it up, and then reprocess it. And I think I'm going to make the rest of these a little more on the coarse side. Okay, let's grab 3 more and keep going. Again, just to show you, it's nice and granulated. Do a 2F, 3F. I'm going to put it all together. Doesn't really matter that much. Grab another 3. And so now I've got my 2 and 3F in here. Probably can't see that. And I've got my 1F in here. So I'm going to put the lid back on. No milling medium. And this is what I mean about getting charcoal under your fingernails. And then put this one on. And I'm actually going to put these back into the ball mill like this and run them, just let it roll for 12 hours. And actually the 1F, I'm going to let it roll for 24 hours. I did an experiment earlier on some 1F, and it worked out very nice. I had a very good burn rate milling it for, or glazing it for 24 hours. So let me put these in the mill. So into the rock tumbler slash powder mill and let it run. Okay, so what is glazing and why do we do it? Well, shortly after black powder started being screened, and that was, they would mix it wet, let it dry until it was about the consistency of modeling clay, and then they would rub it through a screen into evenly sized little granules. And that almost doubled the power of the black powder over serpentine. Well, shortly after that, somebody discovered that if they compressed it and then broke it up, it performed even better. So they started compressing and breaking the powder up. Well, when they started doing that, a couple of really bizarre things started happening. First of all, the powder wouldn't pour through a narrow opening like through the throat of a powder horn or a measure or anything like that. It would start, and then when it get all jammed up, and it would stop. It would form a bottleneck and stop. You'd have to shake it up, and you have to start over again. And that was kind of annoying to a lot of people. But as annoying as that was, there was an even bigger problem. And that was that shipments of black powder from the manufacturers to their destination started sometimes just mysteriously exploding, just blowing up for no reason. They'd be in the wagon, they'd be bouncing and jostling around down the roads out to the fort or wherever, and it would just explode. And engineers had a heck of a time figuring out what was going on here. Well, the answer lay in a few shipments that actually made it to their destinations. And when they got there, everybody was even more surprised to discover that now the powder poured freely. It poured right through a powder horn freely. And when they used it in their muskets, it actually burned more efficiently, meaning that it produced less fouling, and it even increased muzzle velocity a little bit, which further increased range and accuracy. And it took a little examination of the powder itself and some experimenting for engineers to figure out what was going on. Well, as it turns out, unlike when powder is screened, because when it's screened, it forms into nice, rounded, smooth little granules. But when it's compressed and then broken up, those granules now have very sharp corners and jagged edges. And when they're being poured through a narrow opening, they get jammed up together and form a bottleneck and stop. The bouncing and jostling in the barrels on the wagons as they were being moved around from location to location caused all those little grains to bounce and jag, bouncing around and jam up against each other and crash into each other. And it broke those little sharp corners and edges off, and it smoothed the grains down, rounded them off, made them more uniform, made them more consistent. And that was also what was making the powder burn better. That was also what was causing the shipments to explode, because all of those little sharp corners and jagged edges that were getting broken off as the powder rolled around and bounced against each other formed into a very fine dust. And that dust had a nasty habit of forming an electrostatic charge. And when that electrostatic charge discharged, so manufacturers came up with a way of recreating that rocking, rolling motion by rolling the powder in drums made of silk. And the silk allowed all the little fine dust that was formed, called finings, to settle out. And that's called glazing. And that's why we do that today. Unglazed powder will work. It will burn. You can use it. People do. There are people who make their own black powder and they don't glaze. But if they're being honest, they'll all admit that they have a problem pouring the powder through a measure or a powder horn or something like that. They really do. And people who do glaze their powder, it might be psychosomatic. I mean, who knows? But it seems like we get better results. It seems like it just burns better and it's cleaner, just gives us better powder. Okay, so manufacturers, or some of them back in the day, even then started adding powdered graphite to the powder as it was being rolled, because the graphite would then form a thin coating around the granules and make them, it made them look shinier, darker, smoother. That made them pour even better through a sieve or through a measure. And it also kept the grains from caking up in storage, because the military, they got to keep a lot of powder on hand, because if the war breaks out, they can't say, wait, we've got to mill up some powder. They had to have tons and tons of that stuff on hand. And over a couple of years, that stuff could cake down into those barrels really hard. So the graphite prevented that. And it also made the powder even more resistant to electrostatic discharge and to moisture. The problem is graphite can also make the powder burn dirtier and create more fouling. And because of that, some militaries in Europe at the time actually prohibited the use of graphite on powder that was being sold to the military. It was okay for civilians, but military just refused to allow graphite to be used. I don't use graphite, but if you wanted to, now is the time you would add it. You'd put it in now. Don't ask me what kind or how much, because I don't know, because I don't use it. But Goex and Swiss both do use graphite in their powder. In fact, if you go to the Swiss website, there's even a comment in there where looks like they're bragging about their powder being heavily graphite glazed. Okay, like I said, I don't do it. But what I will do is I will just let this run for 12 hours, and then I will sift out those finings and box it up and call it done. So why 12 hours? Well, the first time I glazed powder, I ran it for 2 hours. And I was scared and convinced that when I opened those drums up, it would all just ground back up into powder. That's what I was thinking. So I'm just going to do 2 hours and see what happens. And absolutely nothing had changed. Exactly the same. So I tried it for 6 hours, which is what some other YouTubers recommend. It's what they use. Seems to be pretty popular right now. And I still didn't notice any real change. I mean, I didn't. If you run for 12 or even 6 or whatever, and you're getting good results, then as we say here in the South, bless your heart. But I'm not. I wasn't. So I did a little reading on that, and I discovered that during the American Civil War, the Confederates glazed their powder for 12 hours. Now, that's what was in the book. With the war going on, did they actually take the time to run it for 12 hours? Or did they maybe run it for 6, call it 12, and ship it out? Who knows? But I started running mine, at least the 2, 3F grade, for 12 hours. And then I started noticing a measurable improvement. Now, the 1F, I've just recently started glazing for 24 hours. And I'm getting really good results with that. First of all, some of those really small, fine grains that are actually closer to the size of a 2F, they'll filter out when I re-sieve it when it's done. So I'll get a little more 2F powder out of that. And then the rest of it, it just seems like they're more uniform looking. They look a little more rounded, smoother, more uniform. And it's probably because of being the larger, coarser grains, it needs more time to roll. I guess, I don't know. Anyway, I will let that glaze for 12 hours, and then I'll be back and we'll have a look at it. All right. It's been 12 hours. Actually, it's been 24 hours. But time to see what we got here. I actually already had this apart once, so there wouldn't be any surprises when I opened everything up. Okay, 2 and 3F goes in here. And notice this time, I've got the sieve stacked on top of each other. That's actually how I've been sifting it. I took it apart to show you each one as I was doing it so you could see what's going on there. Normally, I got these from Amazon and they just stack together and you just put everything in at once and start sifting. The 2 and 3F will go through the first screen and get caught on the second screen, and the leavings, the findings it's called, stay on the second screen, or go through. They actually go all the way through. Just like so. And as you can see, maybe you can't see, the 2F and 3F gets caught in the second screen and the 1F goes in the first screen. I think that's good enough. Okay, so take the 1F actually first, and this is the findings it's called, and these are all those little, well, that little doesn't look good. There, how's that? These are all those little sharp corners and jagged edges that got broken off while it was turning. Okay, so put that in here. And actually, it's like I've said before, you can actually, if you look at it, you can actually see it's granulated. It's not a powder. It's been granulated. It's just like a 4F, 5F, probably up to about a 7F. That'll all go back into the drums with the media and will get reprocessed. So for right now, I want that. Let's get rid of let's take the 1F off. Of course, I've got some desiccant in each jar to help absorb any remaining little bits of water that might still be in it. And this is not even half, not even a quarter of the 1F that I've made up. Got another jar, and this is the 2F and 3F together. Now, if I wanted to separate out the 2F from the 3F, I could put these screens together and then just put a 30 mesh screen in between. So I'd have a 20, I'd have a 30, and then I'd have a 50. And it just catches everything as it goes through. And there's my 2 and 3F mixture. Probably mostly 3F with a little 2F in it. Okay. Before I set this up and start it running again, let's do a little burn rate test on this powder after it's been corned. And this time, let's compare it with some Golex. So interesting. But again, we've got to be careful not to read too much into the actual numbers. Some of the stuff can be kind of sluggish out in the open as far as black powder formulas go. What we really care about is that muzzle velocity, the foot-pounds of energy being delivered, and the fouling. That's what we're really interested in. And that's what we're going to look at next when we go to the test range. So see you then.